and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We have been going through the various stages of development in a person's life, from pre-birth to death. Although we haven't gotten there yet, we will be going to death and grief and so forth later on. But every stage of development has a significant problem or challenge that every person experiences in that particular time frame. And we've been going through some of that. We've gone through the elderly period, but the things that you face in your everyday life as an adult, say from the time you're 21 years old, which is legal age, until 65, in which you are considered to be elderly, although many people really aren't, but that's what the textbooks would say. There are a lot of things that happen to you, such as separation and divorce, bullying, adoption, illness, financial problems, death of a loved one, and I could probably add a lot more to this list. So what I want to do is look at a few of these things, because now I've gone through the elderly period in terms of my notes. Let's take a look at some of the things that happen to you between those ages of 21 and when you're elderly at 65. Now I'm going to talk about adoption first. When should you tell a child that they've been adopted? Or maybe you've been adopted yourself. How did you find out that you were adopted? Was it a shock to you? Well, I'm going to start off with a story. It's a good story, and it has a good ending. This girl who was born in Russia to a small family, and it was in a remote part of Russia in which winter lasts about 9 or 10 months of the year. There's not much in terms of summer, so it's very wintry and it's very cold. They're very poor. I'm thinking that she was born somewhere close to Siberia, but I don't know for sure where it was, but in an outreach, kind of a remote part of Russia. And she had a handicap with a leg. She couldn't walk right. And I think she ended up by having to have a prosthesis in order to walk. But the family couldn't take care of her. They were just a very small family in a very tiny house in a very wintry environment. And the baby is born, and sure enough, she has a handicap. And they didn't feel that they could give her the care that she needed or give her any kind of a good life at all. So they put her up for adoption. And an American couple adopted her, and she had a good life, and she was able to make a good productive life out of what she had, and the handicap didn't hold her back, but she had to have extra help with it. The medical help was there, and so it turns out to be good. But she was told that she was adopted when she was young, because it was important for the family, for the couple who adopted her, to let her know that they weren't her birth parents. And the question is, when should it be done? So she was told when she was young, and she adapted to that. She knew that she was put up for adoption because her parents loved her too much to hold her back from the kind of care that she could get if she were adopted by a more affluent couple. So in a sense, they were making a selfless kind of a decision to help her. Not that they didn't love her, but that they wanted her to have the best, and they could not give her the best. So therefore, they allowed her to be adopted. So she understood that she was loved, and the only reason why she was given up for adoption is that they couldn't give her what she needed. So that's a very good thing, to understand that adoption is because somebody decides not to be selfish and allow you to have a better life. Now, when she grew up to the point where she could travel by herself and she was a young adult, she wanted to meet her birth parents, and she was able to make contact with them, and they wanted to see her, she wanted to see them, and because of her handicap, it was kind of a hard trip for her to take, so a lot of preparations had to be made, and in the end, I guess when she got toward Russia, she ended up by taking a train and then a bus to where they were. And so she finally met them, and she established contact with them, and she had some fears. Well, you can imagine what her fears would be. I'm going to call her Joan. Joan is not her real name, of course, but I'm going to call her Joan. What did Joan fear? Well, would they accept her with a handicap? They gave her up because of a handicap. Would they accept her with a handicap? What would her reunion with them be like? And the mother, the birth mother, had some fears too. Would she be angry at her because she was given up for adoption? Would she understand that she did it for very honorable reasons? She didn't want to just get rid of her. She wanted her to have the best care possible. So she made the decision to give her up for adoption. So they both had their sets of fears. Now, when they met each other, it was a joyous reunion. Everything went perfectly. They hit it off just right. The father, because of the years that they were separated, because she never met them until she was an adult, the father had passed on, so her mother was now a widow, and she had two sisters that she didn't know anything about, two grown sisters. They were in a very small house in this wintry environment, and they welcomed her with open arms and shared everything they had with her, and she just loved it. She loved her sisters, she loved her mother, she realized that this was just a wonderful meeting, and she stayed with them for probably 2 or 3 weeks or so. And then she went back to the United States, and they made plans to be able to visit each other or make contact with each other every so often so the contact would remain. That's a good story, but you have to understand that she understood some things when she went to see them that was important. She understood, because of her adoptive parents helping her, that her birth mother really did love her. This was not a case of getting rid of her because she had a handicap, and that she only gave her up to give her a better life. And she was thought of daily. The mother really missed her, but she still had made the right decision for her. And she became friends with her family members and with her sisters that she now had that she didn't even know that she had. There was no anger, there was no resentment, and she was valued by both her parents and her birth parents and her adoptive parents, and she was greatly valued. And this kind of eased her into this adoption situation, and with a very, very good outcome. Now, when do you tell a child that they have been adopted? My feeling is, don't wait too long. Don't wait until they're preteens or teenagers or young adults, because should they find out at an age like that, they're going to be in a total state of shock, because they have been depending on parents that they thought were their birth parents, relying upon them, being taken care of by them, and they just would, to know or to find out that they weren't their birth parents, puts them in a state of shock, and a lot of times in a state of anger. Why didn't I know sooner? Why didn't you tell me? Why was I given up? Is it that my parents didn't want me? And you can see all of the questions that would arise. Who was my real parents? What are they like? You know, did they want me or did they not want me? And they can be in a state of anger and frustration for a long time, and then they have a lot of questions that they really need to resolve. Now, I helped 2 of my clients that I was counseling meet their real birth mothers when they had been adopted. And in one case, it worked out really well. And they had a good resolution, and they were going to keep in touch with each other, and everything worked out well. The other, not so much. She found out who her parents were, but they didn't want to have anything to do with her. They let her know that, yes, they were her parents, but they did not want to have a relationship with her. And they just wanted to cut off all contact with her, and now she had found him. That was going to be the end of it. There wasn't going to be any further relationship there, and of course she was terribly disappointed. Why would a mother or father not want to have a relationship with a child that they had put up for adoption? Why would they not wonder all these years, how are they doing? Are they getting good care? Well, it might disrupt the family situation. If the family is disorganized, if the family has some problems within it, if there's bullying, if there's abuse, if there's drug addiction, all kinds of things like that, a father might not want the rest of his family to know that he has a child that they don't know anything about, and he may want to keep it that way. It may destabilize an already unstable environment, and so therefore the relationship would be cut off. So then what I had to do as a counselor is work with them and help them to realize that they do have a stable environment with the parents who adopted them. And so they're really not without without parents, just not their birth parents, and we have to work that through in some kind of way so it's satisfactory for them, and that they don't have trauma from that. I know I read about a young man who was involved in drugs and gangs and that kind of thing, and never knew who his parents were. And he decided, well, he became a Christian, and he decided, God is my father, God is my mother. There is a scripture to that effect in, and I'm not going to read it off here, but there is a scripture to that effect in the Bible, that God is your parent, that God loves you, and God is your parent, and God is your family. So he hung on to that, and that eased his pain, and he was able to resolve the fact that he never would know who his parents were. So at any rate, the purpose of telling them soon and not late is to avoid that shock and that pain, that they have, and they know all along. They will know what you teach them. And if you teach them that you love them so much that when their parents couldn't take care of them, you were willing to take care of them and be their parents for them so that they would have parents of their own. And so they weren't really lacking anything. So if they know they were loved and they knew there were extenuating circumstances where they couldn't be taken care of, and especially if they could be reunited in a successful attempt to reunite with each other, that would help a lot. Otherwise, they've got all of those questions to ask, and what they're going to think is that they weren't wanted. She got rid of me. My mother got rid of me because she didn't want me. Or if you take a child that someone has tried to abort them, the mother has tried to abort them, and it's been an unsuccessful abortion, and the child lives anyway. And because I don't believe in abortion, as a Christian, I think it's awful. You're taking a child's life. But the thing is, if there has been an attempt for them to be aborted, and they live, they may have a lot of disabilities. Because of the process of abortion, they may have a lot of damage to their bodies. They may not be able to walk well. And I know that there's one girl who goes and talks to students and goes to high schools and so forth and gives little speeches about what it was like growing up, knowing that that an attempt had been made to abort her. But she was successful. She helped a lot of people. She couldn't walk well. She was on crutches, but at the same time, her mind was good, and she was able to have a good career. And she was able to overcome all the angst that it must have occurred when she realized that somebody tried to not have her born. Somebody tried to take her life, and they were unsuccessful. Why, if you live with something like that in your background, and you can overcome that, then you can overcome a lot in your life. So it's a very hard thing for a child to deal with when they find out that they have been adopted. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Who are my real parents? Why did they give me up? Is it because they didn't want me? Is it because they didn't love me? Now, there's a problem that comes in sometimes because the parents may not know. The adoptive parents may know very little or nothing about the parents that gave their child up for adoption. Sometimes the child goes from the birthing process to the new parent, and there's no real interconnection between them. There's no real talking between them. They don't know anything. So a child or an adult is starting from scratch to find out who their parents really were. And then sometimes they find out that their parents were not good people. The father was a drug addict and maybe a murderer, and they may be in prison and all of that kind of thing. And then they have to deal with that. But it's much easier if they know something at a young age and they grow up with it and it becomes a part of them. It becomes a part of their emotional history. It's much easier for them to do that than it is for them to wonder and wish they knew and have a lot of questions that they have to answer, and they feel that their lives are now incomplete because their parents didn't tell them the truth when they were younger. So I'm saying don't wait too long to tell a child. Now, any explanation that you give to a child has got to be age appropriate. You know, you can't go into a whole lot of detail with a 4 or 5-year-old, and maybe it's too early. You have to know your child and what is early enough and not too early for them, and that they will understand it in a very positive way. Now, there are books that have been written for children, understanding that they are adopted. And one book, I didn't bring it with me, Why Was I Adopted? And it's for a child that's probably about 9, a child that can read. And they're probably about 9 or so years old. Why Was I Adopted? And it's a very nice book, and it has these pictures in it, you know, and they kind of make some jokes in the book, and they try to make it kind of a cool thing to be adopted, and they do a pretty good job of it. So I think if you're going to tell a child that they're adopted, at some point, to get some books about it, and then don't just give the book to the child to read it with them, go over it with them, find out what their thoughts and their feelings are, so you can be a partner in their development, and that it can be a positive, not a negative thing. I have 2 friends of mine, they got married. It wasn't an adoptive thing, but it was a blended family. And they both had children. They were both either divorced or widowed, and they both had children, and they found each other, and they fell in love, and they got married. So in the end, they had quite a few children. I'm thinking maybe a dozen. Maybe not that many, but a lot of children. And so, but they did it in such a way that the children got along well with each other, and they were very fair. It wasn't like one parent had more privileges given to their children than the other parent did. There was no conflicts like that. They were very, very fair, and the children blended well. And one of the children told me, and she was a kind of a young adult when she told me, she says, we blended so well that I had to think twice to know which parent I came from, because we belong to both of them. And so it worked out very well. Adoption can work. Marrying a person who has children, and you have children yourself, it can work, but it has to be very, very carefully handled, and it has to be very fair, and you have to be able to think in terms of how a child feels when they know that the person that they're dealing with is not their real parent. And usually it's a case of, you can't tell me what to do, I'm not yours. But if it's carefully done, you can avoid a lot of that. And this is what happened with this lady that was adopted that I talked to you about before. And you know, you have to understand, a child will understand that maybe their parent was sick and they had to adopt because they had to be adopted because one of their parents was sick, or one of them had an accident and was paralyzed and would permanently be in a hospital or some kind of a facility, and they would not be able to take care of them anymore. A young child can accept a lot of things. They're resilient, but you have to do this in an age-appropriate way so they don't feel overwhelmed. And you have to remember that you can never demean the birth parent. If you know that you've adopted a child to get them out of a bad situation because the parents were drug users, you know, you can tell the child that the parent was ill and couldn't take care of you, but you wouldn't demean them. If you demean a natural parent, then eventually the child will really resent you for it because they still are their parent. And so therefore you have to be careful not to do that. They can accept that there are 2 sets of parents as long as it's done carefully and thoughtfully, and as long as it's being a positive experience and it's presented to them as a positive experience. Never demean the birth parents. A child can be taken away because parents are unfit, and that child will still want to defend their natural parent. There's something about children. They want their natural parents, and they want to defend their natural parents. And when you think of that, to demean them, it's just as bad as it's in for a divorce. And I'm going to get into that next. What about divorcing? How do you tell a child that you're going to divorce your husband or your wife? They're in the center of a firestorm, and they get both sides. And sometimes they are taken advantage of by parents parents because the parents want to use them as an excuse to hate the other spouse, and it gets way out of line. Children are not responsible for parents' mistakes. Children are not responsible because they needed to be adopted because they had to be taken out of a bad situation. Nothing like that would be true. But as I work with children, and as I worked with adults too, there's an awful lot of blame that goes on. My husband, he doesn't like my children, and he doesn't treat them right, and he's abusive. And that may or may not be true, but if it is true, you have to get the child out of a situation like that. But if you demean parents, you're still demeaning somebody that they want to have a relationship with, even though they maybe have not seen them much or don't remember much about them. So you have to be careful how you do things. Children do not need to know everything, but they need to know enough that they can understand and make sense of it. So the adoptive parent may not know much about the birth parent and may not even be able to be much of a help. We got you because you are in an orphanage, and we took you out of the orphanage, and maybe nothing is known about the parents. I have somebody that I know that actually adopted a Chinese little boy, and they went to China after him. He was in an orphanage, and the orphanages in China are not very good. There's not much food, there's not much toys. It's mainly a holding thing where there they were, and then they get the basic necessities, but no affection, no challenges to their mind, no extra toys to play with, nothing. And it's a sad situation, but at any rate, they successfully adopted this little boy from China. They don't know anything about the parents' backgrounds. So as the child grows, he'll be told that he's adopted because he looks like he's a Chinese person, which he is, of course, but they won't be able to give him any kind of information on his parents. And the fact is, the orphanage might not have any information either, because a child might have been brought in by somebody and just left there. So it's not always possible to find out about your parents if you are adopted, but bear in mind, if you are adopted, God made it possible for you to be adopted, to have a better life. Make a positive experience out of it, and you'll find that you'll do just fine. Now I'm going to close it here, and we'll probably be talking about divorce next time. So please join me then.